The first time I saw my uncle kill someone, I was 19 years old. That's not the kind of sentence anyone expects to say, but life has a way of unraveling in ways you can't anticipate. The image is still burned into my memory, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the garage light, dragging what was unmistakably a woman's lifeless body from the back of his SUV. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about the man who had raised me after my parents' death shattered like glass. But what terrifies me the most, even now, isn't what my uncle did, it's why he did it. And why, God help me, I eventually helped him. My Uncle Robert had always been the steady presence in my life, the guy with the booming laugh who taught me to fish, to change a tire, to stand up straight when speaking to adults. "Look them in the eye, Danny," he'd say, his hand firm on my shoulder. "That's how they know you've got nothing to hide." The irony of those words wouldn't hit me until years later. When my parents died in the crash, I was just 16. The police said it was instantaneous. A tractor-trailer jackknifed on the highway. My parents' sedan crumpled like an aluminum can. I remember standing at the funeral, numb, as if watching myself from above. Uncle Robert stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, silent tears tracing down his weathered face. That night, he helped me pack my things, and I moved into the spare bedroom of his modest ranch house on the edge of town. Living with Uncle Robert wasn't easy at first. He was a man of routines. Breakfast at 6:30 a.m. sharp, dishes done immediately after meals, homework checked before any television. But beneath his gruff exterior was a kindness that helped me survive those first dark months. He never tried to replace my dad, never pretended to have all the answers, but he was there, steady, reliable, or so I thought. By the time I graduated high school, we'd settled into a comfortable rhythm. I took a gap year before college, working at the local hardware store and helping my Uncle Robert with his contracting business. He specialized in renovations, transforming outdated kitchens and bathrooms into magazine-worthy spaces for the wealthy residents in all of the neighboring towns. I'd often accompany him to job sites, learning the trade while saving money for school. It was during this time that I began to notice little oddities about my uncle. The locked file cabinet in his home office, the late-night phone calls he'd take outside regardless of what the weather conditions were, the way he'd sometimes disappear for an entire weekend, returning tired and tight-lipped. But grief does strange things to people, and I assumed he was simply processing my parents' death in his own way. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that Uncle Robert had suffered his own devastating loss years before mine. It was a muggy August night when everything changed. Uncle Robert had been agitated all day, checking his watch repeatedly, barely touching his dinner. Around 10 p.m., he grabbed his keys and mumbled something about needing to pick up supplies. I thought nothing of it, settling in with a beer and a video game, one of the small rebellions of quasi-adulthood he pretended not to notice. I must have dozed off because when the headlights swept across the living room wall around 2 a.m., I startled awake. Through the window, I watched Uncle Robert's SUV pull into the garage. Curious about his late-night errand, I moved toward the kitchen, which had a connecting door to the garage. That's when I saw it, through the partially opened door, my uncle struggling with what appeared to be a rolled-up carpet, except carpets don't have pale hands dangling from one end. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled backwards, knocking over a chair with a crash that seemed to echo through the silent house. In a panic, I looked toward the garage door. It remained still at first, then, slowly, deliberately, it opened wider. "Danny," my uncle's voice was eerily calm. "Come here, son." Every instinct screamed for me to run, to call the police, to do anything but walk toward the man I now realized I didn't know at all. Yet something, curiosity, shock, or perhaps some misguided family loyalty, propelled me forward. The garage light cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor where the body of a middle-aged woman lay partially wrapped in plastic sheeting and the half-unrolled carpet. Her eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. There was surprisingly little blood, just a small, dark stain spreading from beneath her head. "I can explain," Uncle Robert said, his voice steady despite the madness of the situation. "But first, I need your help." What followed was a nightmarish blur. Latex gloves, more plastic sheeting, the trunk of the SUV, a drive to the dense forest that bordered the county line. I assisted my uncle however he asked, but I moved with a surrealistic numbness, with shock and fear. My uncle worked methodically, with a practiced efficiency that only heightened my terror. This wasn't his first time, which meant there had been others. God, how many others? It was nearly dawn when we returned to the house. Uncle Robert made coffee, his hands steady while mine trembled violently around the mug he placed before me. 12 years ago, he began without prompting, your Aunt Melissa was murdered. I stared at him confused. I had no Aunt Melissa. My father was an only child, and my mother's sister lived in Arizona with her family. Before you came to live with me, I was married, he continued, for 8 years. Melissa was a kindergarten teacher, sweetest woman you'd ever meet. His voice cracked slightly, the first break in his composure. She was killed walking home from school. Hit and run, they said. The official report claimed it was a drunk driver, but I knew better. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn photograph, a smiling blonde woman standing beside a younger, happier version of my uncle. The police found nothing, no witnesses, no camera footage, just my wife's broken body on the sidewalk. The case went cold within months. But how? I managed to stammer, my mind reeling. How does that connect to what just happened? The woman in the garage was Dr. Elaine Winters, he said flatly, chief surgeon at Memorial Hospital, and she helped cover up my wife's murder. What unfolded over the next several hours was a tale so twisted, so filled with conspiracy and revenge that I couldn't fully process it. According to my uncle, Melissa's death was no accident. She had been deliberately targeted by a group he referred to only as the outsiders, people who moved through society wearing masks of normalcy while secretly engaging in unthinkable acts. At the center of this group, my uncle claimed was a surgeon named Simon Slater. He killed her because she saw something she shouldn't have, Uncle Robert explained, his eyes burning with a fever that frightened me more than the dead body had. And his colleagues, doctors, lawyers, business people, they all helped cover it up. I wanted to believe it was delusion, the ramblings of a man driven mad by grief, but as dawn broke and Uncle Robert began producing evidence, photographs, medical records with inconsistencies, email printouts, a terrible possibility emerged. What if he was right? I actually had no reason to doubt his story except the horrible event I'd helped him cover up. The chilling and meticulous way he dealt with Dr. Winter's body brought a dark veil of doubt to his story about a wife I was only now hearing about for the first time. I've spent years tracking them, infiltrating their circles, gathering proof, he said. Dr. Winters was about to talk. She had agreed to meet me, to hand over files that would have exposed them all. But they got to her first. I found her like that, Danny. I swear to God, I found her like that. I didn't know what to believe. The rational part of my brain screamed that my uncle was a murderer and that I was now complicit, that we should both be in prison. But another part, the part shaped by years of trusting this man, whispered that perhaps this nightmare had an explanation after all. The weeks that followed exist in my memory as a series of fragmented scenes. Uncle Robert continuing his normal routine, meeting with clients, submitting bids, making dinner, all while I unraveled internally. My nights were sleepless, haunted by the dead woman's eyes and the growing fear that I was living with a monster. Then came the files. One evening, Uncle Robert called me into his office and unlocked the mysterious file cabinet. Inside were hundreds of meticulously organized documents, surveillance photos, background checks, medical records, all centered around a core group of about a dozen individuals. These are the outsiders, he said, spreading the files across his desk. People who look human but aren't, not on the inside. They've been operating in this area for decades, using their positions of power to cover for each other. The centerpiece was a man named Simon Slater, distinguished-looking, silver-haired, with the confident smile of someone accustomed to respect. Chief of surgery at Memorial, board member for multiple charities, a pillar of the community. He's their leader, Uncle Robert said, his voice dropping to a whisper, and he's the one who personally killed Melissa. What my uncle described was a group that engaged in ritualistic killings, using their professional positions to dispose of bodies, falsify records, and silence anyone who came too close to the truth. It sounded insane, the stuff of horror movies or conspiracy theories, yet the meticulous evidence before me was difficult to dismiss entirely. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my mouth dry with fear. "Because they know about you now," he replied, his eyes meeting mine. "They've always watched me, but now they're watching you too. You're in danger, Danny, whether you help me or not." That night, I tried to escape, packed a bag while Uncle Robert slept, planning to go to the police, to a friend's house, anywhere but here. But as I reached the front door, headlights swept across the window, a car slowly cruising past our house at 3 a.m. It circled back 10 minutes later, and again after that. Whoever it was, they were watching the house, watching me, or us, or both of us. I retreated to my room, heart pounding, suddenly uncertain of everything. Who to trust, what to believe, where safety might lie. By morning, I'd made a decision that would forever alter the course of my life. I would help my uncle gather evidence, enough to take to authorities beyond our potentially corrupted local police. Then we would both turn ourselves in, explaining the circumstances around Dr. Winter's death and the disposal of her body. It was, I told myself, the only way out for both of us. What I couldn't have known was that this decision would lead me into darkness beyond anything I could imagine. Over the next 3 months, I became my uncle's reluctant accomplice. Not in killing, he promised, but in surveillance. We tracked the movements of Simon Slater and his associates, photographed their meetings, and intercepted communications when possible. Uncle Robert had transformed his contracting business into the perfect cover, renovating homes of people connected to the outsiders, installing hidden cameras in their walls during construction. The more we watched, the more disturbing patterns emerged. There were unexplained absences, strange gatherings at Slater's lakeside property, and most chillingly, a pattern of missing persons reports that coincided with these meetings. "They need to be stopped," Uncle Robert would say, his eyes feverish with purpose, "not just for Melissa anymore, for anyone they've hurt." I told myself I was gathering evidence for the authorities, but with each passing day, I felt myself slipping further from the person I had once been. The weight of our secret and the growing possibility that my uncle's conspiracy theory wasn't actually a theory pressed down on me like a physical force. Then came the night of the gathering. All our surveillance had pointed to a significant meeting at Slater's Lake House, a remote property surrounded by acres of private forest. This was our chance, Uncle Robert insisted, to gather definitive evidence of the outsiders' activities. We positioned ourselves in the woods bordering the property, equipped with night vision binoculars and a directional microphone. As darkness fell, vehicles began arriving, expensive cars with tinted windows, bringing well-dressed men and women who moved with purpose toward the house. "That's Judge Carlton," Uncle Robert whispered, pointing to a stooped figure, "and there the police chief. See what we're up against?" Around midnight, when the gathering was in full swing, Uncle Robert nudged me. "They're moving toward the boathouse. This is it." Through the binoculars, I watched as the group proceeded to a large structure at the water's edge. Someone carried what appeared to be a large duffel bag, sagging in the middle as if weighted. "We need to get closer," Uncle Robert said, already moving through the underbrush. What happened next remains the most horrifying experience of my life. From our new position behind the boathouse, we could hear chanting, rhythmic and ancient sounding, in no language I recognized. Through a dirty window, we glimpsed figures arranged in a circle around an altar-like table. On it lay a form I initially thought was a mannequin, until it moved. I bit down on my hand to stifle a scream. The figure was a person, bound and frightened but very much alive. Simon Slater stood at the head of the table, raising what looked like an ornate knife, his face transformed by an expression of ecstatic cruelty. Uncle Robert grabbed my arm and gripped me painfully tight. "Now, do you believe me?" I couldn't speak, couldn't process the horror unfolding before us. This was beyond murder, beyond conspiracy. This was something ancient and evil, something that shouldn't exist in our rational, modern world. We should have left then, should have run to the nearest FBI office with our evidence, but Uncle Robert had waited too long for this moment. As Slater raised the knife higher, my uncle burst through the boathouse door, brandishing the gun I hadn't known he was carrying. What followed was chaos. Shouts, gunshots, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. I found myself in the middle of the melee, fighting for my life against people whose eyes seemed empty of humanity. Uncle Robert moved with lethal precision, his years of planning culminating in this moment of violence and justice. When it was over, when the screams had faded to moans and then silence, I stood in the center of the boathouse, shaking uncontrollably. My uncle worked methodically, checking the bodies, gathering the recording devices we had planted. "It's over," he said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. They can't hurt anyone else now. But as the adrenaline faded and the full horror of what we had done, what I'd helped do, crashed over me, I realized it couldn't possibly be over. Not like this. Not with a bloodbath that made us no better than the monsters we had fought. "We have to call the police," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Uncle Robert looked at me for a long moment and then nodded slowly. "You're right, but not the locals. They're compromised. We'll drive to the state police headquarters, turn ourselves in with all the evidence." We burned our bloody clothes at the lake house, cleaned ourselves as best we could, and loaded what evidence we could into the SUV. The drive was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I struggled to reconcile the uncle I had known, the man who taught me to fish and checked my homework, with this avenging figure who had orchestrated a massacre. We were about 20 miles from the state police headquarters when Uncle Robert suddenly pulled off into a deserted rest stop. "I need a minute," he said, stepping out of the vehicle. I watched as he walked to the edge of the trees, his shoulders slumped. After everything we'd been through, this moment of vulnerability struck me as profoundly human. I got out and followed him. "Uncle Robert," I began, not even sure what I wanted to say. He turned, and the look on his face froze the words in my throat. His eyes were black, entirely black, without iris or white, and his mouth stretched in a weird smile that distorted his face. "Danny," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own, "you've been so helpful, so trusting." I stumbled backwards, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. What are you?" "Your uncle died the night your parents did," the thing wearing his face said conversationally. "Such a convenient accident, that crash. It gave me the perfect opportunity to step in, to get close to you." Horror washed over me as the implications sank in. You're one of them? You're an outsider?" It laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The outsiders were real, Danny. Everything I told you about them was true, except for one detail. They weren't the monsters. They were the hunters. For generations, they've protected humanity from things like me." My legs gave out and I sank to the asphalt. Then Melissa was getting too close to the truth. She suspected her husband wasn't her husband anymore. It smiled that terrible smile again, and now, thanks to you, the last organized resistance against us is gone. The thing that wasn't my uncle stepped closer to me, its movements suddenly fluid in a way that was distinctly inhuman. "I should thank you, Danny. We couldn't touch them directly, you see. Old protections, old magic. But you could, and you did. You helped me destroy them all." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. 3 years of my life, 3 years of trust and grief and misplaced loyalty, crystallized into a singular moment of horrific clarity. I hadn't been living with my uncle. I had been living with the thing that killed him. "What happens now?" I managed to ask, my voice a broken whisper. It considered me, head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Now? Now the world changes. My kind have waited centuries for this moment. As for you..." It reached toward me with fingers that seemed too long and disjointed to be human. "You've been such a good nephew. I think you deserve to see what comes next." I closed my eyes, waiting for death. Instead, I felt something cold and slithering entering my mind, sifting through my memories, my thoughts, my very sense of self. I tried to resist, to hold on to who I was, but the invasion was relentless. When I opened my eyes again, I was alone at the rest stop. The SUV was gone. In my hand was a small, leather-bound book, a journal filled with names and addresses in my uncle's handwriting. On the first page, a single sentence, "Find the others." That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've been searching, not for the outsiders who I now know were our last line of defense, but for others like me, survivors, people who might have knowledge of how to fight back against the things wearing human faces. Sometimes, in the dark of night, I feel the echo of that presence in my mind. The thing that wasn't my uncle, watching through my eyes. I don't know if I'm still entirely myself, or if something was left behind, growing inside me like a cancer. All I know is that I have to try to undo what I've done. I have to warn people about what's coming. The invasion isn't beginning, it's already here, living in our homes, wearing the faces of those we love. So look carefully at your family tonight. Study their smiles, their eyes, the way they move, and ask yourself, do you really know who they are? Because I thought I knew my uncle. I would have staked my life on it. And in a way, I did. Thanks for listening to another of my Dark Veil Tales. If you enjoyed the story and want to hear more, be sure to click the story linked here or others in my video section. And if you're so inclined, like or subscribe to my channel. It will definitely be appreciated. Have a frightfully fantastic day.